of the prophets when they are alive. He called us to make the right choice. And then the last night when he was in Memphis, that last night, and sometimes the media and others, they like to grab his hoop and not listen to his substance. I Have a Dream was the hoop. I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over and that was the hoop. He had done that before. But before he said any of that in Memphis, he said, America is sick. 2 weeks earlier, he had said, America must be born again. The sermon he was going to preach that Sunday, if he had lived, was America is going to hell if she doesn't deal with the issue of poverty and racism and militarism in her policies. That night, he said, now let me say as I move to my conclusion, we have to give ourselves to this struggle because nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop at this point in Memphis. We got to see it through. And when we have our march, he said, you need to be there. If you got to leave work, if you got to leave school, be concerned about your brother. You may not be on strike, but we either go up together or we go down together. This, my friends, is the Martin Luther King, the preacher, who understood that to preach has always meant more than oratory and words. To preach in the tradition of Martin Luther King is to agitate, and yes, it is to separate from injustice, and it is not just some cute love that says everybody loves everybody. It is the kind of love that dares to tell the truth about injustice. And if you're not going to deal with that part of Dr. King, then leave him alone. Jesus connected preaching to deeds of liberation, incarnate acts of liberation, work toward wholeness. To preach is to proclaim. It is to speak to the death of our times. It is to take words and put flesh on them that challenge the forces that kill. A preach word is not anything until it takes on flesh and gets the work. The living word of God renders a reorientation in our lives. Preach the good news at all times, St. Francis of Assisi said, and when necessary, use words. Preaching must beget a living contradiction. To preach is to have a quarrel with the world's injustices. The preach word must put on flesh and suit up for struggle. If it doesn't, it's just preaching. It's just pretending, and it's not preaching. Moses preached, and his preaching turned into a movement that challenged the oppression of Pharaoh. Isaiah preached, but his word called for deeds when he went to his state house and asked the politicians of his day, is this the kind of fasting you think that God has chosen? No, I need you to pay people what they deserve. Or in Isaiah 10, when God told Isaiah to say to the politicians of his day, woe unto you who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights and make women and children your prey. Amos preached to raise up a remnant that would let justice roll down like water. Ezekiel preached until a valley of dry bones turned into an army of hope. Because in the days of Ezekiel, the politicians were so ruthless that he said, your politicians have become like wolves, devouring the poor and the women and the children and the sick and the immigrant. Sojourner preached, Truth preached, and spoke relentless. William Lord Garrison, a true white evangelical who was an abolitionist, he preached and fought in the abolition movement. Fannie Lou Hamer preached and stood up for freedom and said, I didn't come here for just one seat. Rabbi Heschel, the Jewish rabbi, preached and drew on the Torah. And Rabbi Heschel said, there always is a quarrel between Pharaoh and Moses. Pharaoh is not ready to capitulate. The Exodus began, but it is far from having been completed. And then Rabbi Heschel, who Cornel West called the strongest condemnation of racism by a white man since William Lloyd Garrison. This is a white man talking. This is Rabbi Heschel. Racism is Satanism. It is unmitigated evil. Heschel told Kennedy, he told her, you cannot worship God and at the same time look at a man as if he was a horse just because he's a different color than you.